pretty sure if any of you guys ever went in for a job interview, the employer has asked you, are you a leader or are you a follower? And I bet money that 99.99% of the times you have said leader. Because the word leader, it sounds good. It's almost like that's what the employer wants to hear. It's you're the tip of the spear, first one in, last one out, always stand up for what's right. But in our generation, even generations prior, we have been so disconnected from what being a leader actually is. To this day, a lot of people still think that being a leader means you got to be the biggest, strongest, fastest, smartest, not realizing that 3 of the main qualities to leadership is to be able to keep your head cool under pressure, to make the tough decisions, and even more importantly, to inspire people to follow you. But there is one dark truth to leadership that a lot of people are not aware of. And if they are aware of it, a lot of people don't talk about it. Because if a lot of people understood this very dark truth, hardly anybody would want to be a leader. That's why it truly takes a special few to take on this burden. Now, you're probably thinking, what is this dark secret? A couple years ago, I was watching this movie called The Ten Commandments. And actually, I was a little kid when I was watching it, but it was made in 1950 and it was with Charlton Heston. And it basically goes through the story of Moses. Moses is born Hebrew. He ends up being raised by the Pharaoh. Pharaoh finds out about him, casts him out. He ends up meeting God. God tells him to go back and free the Israelites. He goes back through many series of events. He finally frees the Israelites. Pharaoh realizes the mistake, goes after them. Moses parts the Red Sea, crashes the Red Sea on the Pharaoh. Then finally tells his people, okay, I'm going to go up to get the 10 Commandments. He goes up, comes back down, find the people participating in the most sinful of behavior, banishes those people out.
Those who will not live by the law shall die by the law.
And then he goes on this 40-year journey through the desert. And finally, after everything he went through, the whole purpose of his journey, of his life, was to get the people to the promised land. And finally, when the people get to the promised land, he looks and he dies, never getting to step foot into the promised land. Now, as a kid, this really bothered me because I started asking myself, how could someone dedicate their whole life to something and not reap the benefits? He was faithful. He was faithful to the mission. He was faithful to God, but yet he never got any of the benefits from it. And as kids, we're grown up with this idea of you get what you work for, you reap what you sow, but this basically contradicted everything. How did this make sense? And then I started realizing through many years that true leadership, being a pioneer, being a visionary, being a trailblazer, you are guiding your people to a prize you yourself will never obtain. And the only reason I was able to come up with this idea was when I started looking at individuals in history. Now, if you want to focus on companies, we could start off with Apple, Steve Jobs. Now, I know a lot of people want to say, well, Steve Jobs was a dick, he made a lot of money. Yes, but compared to what Apple is now, no. Steve Jobs founded Apple, him and Steve Wozniak, founded it in 1976. They did not create, yes, they were doing computers, but they did not create the first product that captured the hearts of the world until 2001, which was the iPod. They did not create the iPhone until 2007. And in 2011, he died. So to give you guys an idea, in 2011, the opening market for stocks, Apple opened up at $47.08 a share. In the year 2020, Apple opened up at $300.35 a share. So from a numbers point of view, Apple barely began to scratch the surface. Now, if you want to look at Marvel, because last year Endgame came out, everybody knows who Stan Lee is. Very few people know who Jack Kirby is. Jack Kirby and Stan Lee basically created Marvel. Like, they worked side by side. The only reason why a lot of people know who Stan Lee is because Jack Kirby was a hard person, didn't really have that much of a personality, and Stan Lee was able to attach himself to the company. But if it wasn't for Jack Kirby, Marvel wouldn't have been what it was. But he died in 1994, 6 years before the first major motion picture blockbuster came out for Marvel, which was X-Men. Now, even if you want to look at Stan Lee, yes, Stan Lee did the cameos. Yes, he got to see his movies grow into whatever it is now. Yes, he made quite a bit of money, but if you look at the last couple of years of his life, they weren't enjoyable for him. And isn't it kind of ironic that he died 5 months before Endgame came out. The movie that was supposed to become the highest grossing movie ever, to wrap up this whole saga, basically bring the entire world together. And he died 5 months before it came out. Now, if you also want to look at visionaries, people that introduce new ideas to the world, you probably want to look at Martin Luther King. Now, a lot of people know him as a civil rights activist, but if you really narrow it down, his whole purpose, his whole mission was to make it for everyone had a voice. Everyone had the right to vote. And he accomplished that in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. But he was killed in 1968, 3 years after accomplishing that mission. You can also look at Abraham Lincoln. A lot of people only know him for the last 4 years of his life, but if you really break it down, Civil War started in 1861. He did not sign the Emancipation Proclamation until January 1st, 1863. War ended April 9th, 1865, and he was killed April 15th, 1865. Now, I know I'm talking about very life-changing events here, but this can also work on a smaller scale. I'm going to focus on the UFC for a little bit. A lot of people know who Bruce Lee is. But if it wasn't for Bruce Lee basically breaking the standard of teaching martial arts to the quote-unquote white people and proving that you don't need one specific style. It's better to be a well-rounded martial artist. Learn from different styles and bring it all together.
You see, actually, I do not teach, karate because I do not believe in styles anymore. I mean, I do not believe that there is such thing as like Chinese way of fighting or the Japanese way of fighting or whatever way of fighting, because unless human beings have 3 arms and 4 legs, we will have a different form of fighting. But basically, we have only 2 hands and 2 feet. So styles tends to not only separate men, because they have their own doctrine.
We wouldn't have the UFC. He even predicted way back when that people are going to come together. We're going to figure out what style is better. But he died before even getting close to seeing that prediction. Now, if you also want to look at the fighters, if you look at UFC 1, arguably the biggest name was Royce Gracie. If it wasn't for him proving that a smaller fighter with the right skill can be a bigger fighter, probably the UFC wouldn't be what it is right now. But he basically paved the way for Tito and Chuck. Tito and Chuck paved the way for GSP and Anderson Silva. They paved the way for someone like Conor McGregor. Now, here's what you got to notice with this. Each generation always did better than the other. But you take someone that made money, like I said, in UFC 1, Royce Gracie, is he even close to making what Conor McGregor's making? Absolutely not. But if it wasn't for him, Conor McGregor wouldn't be able to make that money. And now we can even focus on women's MMA. Dana White himself came out saying, we will not have women's MMA.
When are we going to see women in the UFC, man?
Never.
Never?
If it wasn't for Ronda Rousey basically kicking the door down and making a market for women MMA, it wouldn't be there. It wouldn't exist. But here's the problem, is the sport passed her by. So no, she did not die, but she paved the way. That's the whole point to what I'm trying to make, is that true leadership, being a pioneer, being a visionary, you're guiding others to a prize that you will not possess yourself. It's not necessarily about how or being celebrated in the moment, but it's how you're remembered after you're gone. It's about legacy. It's wanting to make it better for the next generation, even though you may not be there to reap the benefits. But some people always have the problem of, how could I dedicate my whole life to something when I won't receive anything? And the answer? When what you're doing comes more than just about you. I grew up in the Mexican culture. I've known people that jumped the border, that sacrificed everything to get here. They sacrificed money for the coyote, their lives. They left family to bring their immediate family, their kids, to the United States. Why? To work in the 20 years in the fields for the rest of their life? No. But by working 20 years in the fields and sacrificing their life, they made it better for the next generation. That's what leadership is. The story of Moses can teach us a lot of things about life. But when you really break it down, the biggest lesson that it could teach us is when you see that there is change that needs to be made, and no one else has the guts or the idea to change it, then it's worth dedicating your whole life to. Because then the mission became a lot more than just about you. It became more about your people, about your family. And that's worth changing the world for.